Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat live lectures. Dear friends, today in Modern Indian History we will be talking about extremists in Indian national movement. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Manoj Sharma. Dr. Sharma is Assistant Professor in Department of History in Kirorimal College, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to all the viewers. Today's topic of discussion is extremists in Indian national movement. The phase of the Indian national movement in which extremists they played an important role comes just after the role of the moderates. Rather, extremists were more extreme in their approach when they were being compared with the moderates. The foundation of the Indian National Congress in 1885 and thereafter the role of the moderates from 1885 to 1905, and how moderates they initiated certain important things in the Indian national movement in the context that they were the beginners of an organized kind of protest. And extremists were some of the important leaders, specifically Lal, Bal and Pal. They were known as the chief extremist leaders, and how these people they criticized the moderates, the kind of politics and the policies which were being followed by the moderates were criticized by the extremist leaders. And they particularly believed that that the moderates they engaged in mendicancy, and they also considered them to be armchair intellectuals, those who were making hollow speeches and were not able to achieve anything in the context of the national movement. So these people they wanted that some strong measures they should be taken, some of the new methodology or methods they should be applied so that their demands are met. So this particular group basically emerged from the moderates themselves. They had the same possibly the same social background, and these people they tried to make a mark in the Indian politics in the context that they realized that the British they will not leave India, and the kind of exploitation which was being taking place, it was damaging in India in every way. So the kind of politics was based on the collective bargaining and the social pressure. So this is how they tried to bring their politics, that they wanted to apply as much as social pressure, and at the same time they wanted to collectively bargain with the British. When we see the emergence of extremists, we say that Vimla Prasad, one of the historians, he has talked about that while locating the social background of the extremist, their emergence as assertion of power by urban petty bourgeoisie at district local levels. Some of the Cambridge historians have presented the emergence of extremists as basically a set of factional quarrels for the control of Congress. Above interpretation seems far from being plausible or acceptable in the context that Cambridge historians they have always criticized the Indian national movement, and they have not accepted the Indian national movement as some sort of a movement because they have not accepted India as a nation. They always said that Indians they were fighting amongst themselves for some petty benefits. So this kind of an approach which says that two groups of Congress, moderates and extremists, they wanted to control the Congress in their own way. So the Cambridge historians they have argued that these kind of factional quarrels between these two sections they were being taking place. So that was the main reason of this kind of a politics. So this school basically believes in the kind of factionalism which was there in the Indian society. And extremists, what they have done is that they have built some sort of a critique of the moderate politics, the kind of politics which was being followed by the moderates that has been criticized by the extremist groups. In this, what we see is that three principal bases of later extremism could be seen, and these were Bengal group, which was represented by Bipin Chandra Pal and Aurobindo, then Maharashtra group, which was led by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and the Punjab group, which was led by Lala Lajpat Rai. So Lal, Bal and Pal, those who were the main leaders of this extremist group, these people they were operational in different parts of India, and how the movement in all these three parts of India unfolded was also as a result of the kind of policies which were being followed by the extremist leaders. So, what we see is that in all these three regions, be it Tilak in Maharashtra or Lala Lajpat Rai in Punjab or Bipin Chandra Pal in Bengal, they had certain shared ideals, and according to these shared ideals they were leading the movement in all these three regions. And moderates, against the moderates, they had certain kind of a reaction, and this extremist group was reacting to the moderates, the kind of policies and the politics which was being followed by the moderates. And this could be seen in the three main forms. First was a non-political trend towards the self-development, ignoring rather than directly attacking the foreign rule. Secondly, attempting the mass mobilization for Swaraj through certain new techniques called passive resistance. And then revolutionaries who believed in individual violence and conspiracies. So, what we see that there are various trends within the extremist movements, and all these trends, they were working in different quarters, but at the same time they were also sharing certain ideological kind of ideas as well. So, there was a trend which was talking about the self development, and it was not directly attacking the foreign rule, rather the focus was on self development. On the other hand, a group was talking about the mass mobilization through Swaraj, and for this they wanted to do it through the passive resistance model, that they have to passively resist the British so that British are not able to harm them in a very violent manner. And at the same time, revolutionaries, those who believed in the individual cult of violence, and they also indulged in certain conspiracies so as to dislodge the colonial rule. When we see the kind of causes for the rise of extremism, when we see that the true nature of the colonial rule became exposed to the Indian masses, and how Dadabhai Naoroji, through the drain of wealth theory, exposed the nature of the colonial rule, and how India's misery and impoverishment was as a result of the colonial rule of the British. Then the reaction against the rising westernization. The writings of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, then Vivekanand and Swami Dayanand appealed to them, and they drew inspiration from Indian spiritual heritage. So, what we see is that extremists, on the one hand, they realized the true nature of the colonial rule and the kind of exploitation which was taking place because of the colonial rule, and on the other hand they also realized that the rising westernization will cause some kind of a threat to them in some way, that how Indian spiritual heritage was comparatively more superior to the British thinking or the British ideas, and they realized that if they will follow the British traditions, if they will follow the British ideas, then India is not going to prosper, rather the decline or disintegration of the Indians will take place. So, both the things, one, the true nature of the colonial rule was realized by them, and for this they tried to create as much as awareness among the masses by telling them about the drain of wealth which was taking place from India to Britain, how Indian goods, how Indian money was being exported from India to Britain, and because of which how it was leading to the economic degeneration and the decline in the context of the handicraft industry in India. So, all this was exposed to the Indian masses, and Indian masses could realize that how they have to make efforts to throw off the colonial rule. Then the rising westernization was also a great threat to the Indians, that British, they always suggested that they were more superior in nature, their ideas were comparatively more superior to the Indians, and if Indians will not realize that their ideas were more superior than the British ideas, their language was more prosperous than the English language, which was considered to be the language of the workers until 13th 14th century, and India had rich cultural traditions of language and literature. So, these kind of ideas, they were again propagated by some of the thinkers, and when these thinkers brought out these kind of ideas, then it was realized by the masses that they should not feel inferior in any way because of the kind of oppressive rule of the British. When you see the other factors, we will say that extremists, they were dissatisfied with the moderate brand of politics, the kind of politics which was based on petition, prayer and protest, that was rejected by the extremists. And moderates also believed in the justness of the colonial or the British rule. So extremists, they realized that British, they were not just in any way, rather they were exploiting Indians in every way. And at the same time, the brand of politics which was being followed by the moderates, it had reached a dead end, and most of their demands, they had remained unfulfilled, and this was definitely a reason for the rise of extremism in the Indian politics. Fourthly, what we see is that the economic condition of India was worsening. The kind of famines which India saw or witnessed during that particular period, heavier taxation on the Indian masses, and the government apathy in all these things, it contributed to the rising discontent against the colonial rule. So what we see during this particular period is that the Indian condition from the economic perspective, it was deteriorating. And when you find that a number of famines in the 19th century, and then you have in 20th century the number of famines, they continue, and because of the famines, impoverishment of the Indians and malnourishment of the Indians was taking place, and British, they were not at all concerned about such kind of a scenario in which Indians, they were suffering at the hands of the British. Then they continued with their heavier taxation. A large amount of money was collected in the form of taxes. So all this created an atmosphere in which the Indians, they realized that unless they will tackle the British in a very strong way, then they will not be able to realize their independence. So that was an important factor for the rise of extremism. Another important thing was the contemporary international influences. When we see that a number of smaller countries, they defeated the major nations. So this provided some sort of an inspiration to the nations, those who were lesser in form or those who were smaller, when they were being compared with the bigger nations whom they defeated. So this also inculcated or provided some sort of an inspiration to the nations which were under the colonial rule, that they can also come out of their colonial rule if they make some kind of concerted efforts. In that context, I would like to point out the Abyssinia's repulsion of the Italian army in 1896 and the triumph of Japan over Russia in 1905. So these defeats to the European nations gave some sort of a jolt to European invincibility, that Europeans, they were being considered to be invincible in nature, that they will not be defeated. But when they were defeated, it provided some kind of hope to the Asian countries as well, that they were in a way capable of defeating the major powers of Europe. Then the reactionary policies which were being followed by Curzon during that particular period, you see that a number of acts they were being imposed or they were being brought about, and they caused a number of a huge resentment or dissatisfaction among the Indians. Curzon had this kind of a belief that Indians, they were of very low character, and this could be seen in the various acts which he committed during that particular period. So this also annoyed Indians in every way. He also organized the Delhi Darbar in 1903, when India had not entirely recovered from the distressing consequences of the famines of 1899 and 1900. So what we see is that the colonial apathy could be seen in every sphere. In 1876, when the Delhi Darbar was organized during the Viceroyalty of Lytton, during that point of time also India was reeling under the problem of famines. And similarly here also, when again a Delhi Darbar was organized to show the pomp and the glamour and the power of the British authority, even during that particular period also Indians were reeling under the threat of famine, and how difficult the life had become during those particular years. But British were not concerned with such kind of issues, rather they were more concerned in showing their might and authority. And to show their might and authority, they organized this imperial darbar in 1903. So this also played an important role in the context of rising extremist feelings, as people they became more and more aware that British, they were not in any way concerned with their kind of situation. The partition of Bengal in 1905 was another act of colonial administration which created or which led to the Swadeshi movement, as you can see on the screen as well. The program of action of extremists was advocacy of the boycott of foreign commodities, use of Swadeshi products, emphasis on national education and passive resistance. The aim of Swadeshi and boycott was to promote Indian industries and provide the masses with more opportunities for work and employment. So what we see is that the partition of Bengal in 1905, it also played an important role in terms of rising extremism. The way partition of Bengal was done, it was totally distressful for the Indians, and at the same time they also realized that the motive of partition of Bengal was to weaken the national movement in Bengal. So for this reason the Swadeshi movement was started, and the focus of Swadeshi was on indigenous goods. And at the same time it also wanted to promote the boycott, and boycott led to the bonfire of various foreign products, be it clothes, be it other foreign commodities, in which a number of people participated, and this became quite popular during that particular period as well. And when in this charged atmosphere, the extremists, they became more popular because they were asking for such measures that British, they will be troubled because of their policies. So when we try to assess extremists in some way, we find that they advocated democracy, they advocated constitutionalism, and they wanted to broaden the social base of the national movement. They wanted that more and more Indians, they should join the national movement, they should come to the forefront of the national movement, and when the social base of the movement will be broadened, then the movement will be strengthened. So that was one of the important considerations or objectives of the extremists. Then they published a number of newspapers in the vernacular press or the vernacular languages, because most of the Indians during that particular period, they did not know English, they had their own regional languages, and when newspapers, they were being published in their own regional languages, then they had wider readership in that context. They also realized and pointed out the negative effects of British rule in India. They realized that British rule was totally negative in India. They realized that the kind of measures and the policies which were being followed by the British in India were not in any way beneficial to the Indians. Rather, their policies were creating some kind of a situation from the economic perspective that a number of famines and a lot of poverty could be seen in India. And at the same time, not any kind of political freedom was not given to Indians. Rather, British wanted to maintain their stranglehold over the Indians in every way, and they did not want to provide any kind of rights to the Indians. So from that perspective, extremists, they advocated all the democratic measures, and they wanted that through the constitutional means, India should be able to achieve its objective of promoting democracy in India. And at the same time, focusing on the newspapers will in a way provide them an opportunity to share their ideas. When their ideas will go to the vernacular press, more and more people will read those ideas and will become aware of the principles and the ideals of the national movement. So, this was one of the important strategies, that how the vernacular press will create some kind of consciousness among the masses, because when these kind of ideas of the national leaders, they will be reported in the vernacular press, then then the people will become aware, and when they will become aware, then they will also join the movement as well. The extremists, they have been criticized on a number of grounds. For example, for their excessive glorification of the ancient heritage, they have been criticized. At the same time, the conscious deification of nation, where they considered nation as a deity and nation became some sort of a god. The concept of motherhood was also popularized through religious rhetoric. Vande Mataram, which was a pure Bengali slogan, was converted into Sanskrit. It was nothing but another form of goddess Durga. So, what we see is that there were a number of critics of the policies of the extremists as well, and they say that they excessively glorified the ancient heritage of India, and they wanted to in a way make nation some sort of a deity. Nation was shown as some sort of a god, and the concept of motherhood was also popularized, that nation was seen as some sort of a mother. So, it was a mother earth or mother goddess who was being reincarnated in some reincarnation has taken place in the way of the nation. So, all these kind of things, they were being or these kind of ideas, they were being criticized by the people, those who did not adhere to the policies and the programs of the extremists. And what we also see is that there was a pure Sanskrit slogan or Bengali slogan which was being converted into Sanskrit, Vande Mataram, and Vande Mataram was also related to the another form of goddess Durga. So, all these kind of ideas, they had some kind of religious underpinnings as well, and because of which some of the critics, they have pointed out that some other communities, they could not join the movement in the way they should have. I would like to talk about Bal Gangadhar Tilak in this framework, that he was the most important, the extremist leader, and the kind of development he was talking about of the patriotic cum historical cult as a central symbol of nationalism. He was also associated with anti-cow killing association. He introduced the Ganesh festival and Shivaji festival, and this presented him as a leader of Hindu orthodoxy and Hindu nationalism. Tilak's resistance to age of consent bill, which aimed to increase age of consummation of marriage for girls from 10 to 12 years, was also criticized. He said that Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. So, what Bal Gangadhar Tilak contributed from the extremist point of view was immense. The kind of contribution he made to the extremist cause and to the cause of the national movement was realized by the later leaders as well. But many of the things, the critics, they have argued that many of the things which he initiated in the form of Ganesh and the Shivaji festivals alienated some of the sections of the society, though he might not have that kind of intention where he wanted to alienate other sections of the society. He wanted to bring those kind of cultural symbols to the forefront, so that more and more people, they should join the national movement. So, that might have been the kind of idea which Tilak had, and he was able to bring a number of masses to these kind of festivals, cultural festivals which were associated with Shivaji, which were associated with Ganesh, and how these people, when they joined these festivals, some kind of bonhomie, some kind of idea of unity came to these people when they came in large numbers. The critics of extremists have also criticized them as revivalist and obscurantist in nature. They say that two important fallouts took place because of their policies, that it alienated a number of Muslims who did not want to see a nation as God. Secondly, support to social introspection became obsolete, as past Indian society was shown to be superior in science, and India in ancient India was shown to be far superior to that available in Western world in modern times. So what we see is that when there was a lot of focus on Indian technology, it was being argued that Indian technology in ancient times was far more superior to the technology which was available in the modern times, and they argued that ancient India was far more developed when you see the modern world of the Western nations. So all these kind of ideas where they became more and more revivalist in nature. They did not want to look into the problems of the Indian society which had crept in over a period of time. So that was being criticized by their critics, that they should have been more progressive, they should have been more forward looking, rather they were looking back to see the Indian heritage in the past times. So they wanted to derive some kind of inspiration from the Indian heritage in that context, and that was one of the reasons that the extremists, they were being criticized by their critics. Moreover, they were considered to be more emotional in nature. There was a lot of some sort of an excessive emotionalism in their fiery speeches, and at the same time what we see is that both moderates as well as extremists, they suffered from the same class constraints, and hence their influence as far as evaluation of outcome is concerned was not very plausible. So both the moderates as well as the extremists, they came from the same social background, and when they came from the same social background, they have similar kind of ideas in their minds. But extremists, they were comparatively more extreme in their approach in terms of achieving their objectives. When you see the other leaders like Lala Lajpat Rai and Bipin Chandra Pal, they also talked about the Hindu nation and safeguarding the Hindu interest at political levels. And what we also see, as you can see on the screen as well, that despite the fact that the revivalist aspect of extremist politics was chiefly directed against colonial rule, it led to growth of a harmful interrelationship between religion and politics, apart from promoting communalism and Muslim separatism. So this was an important fallout of the policies which was being followed by the extremist leaders, though they might not have intended to create such kind of a situation. They might have been unaware that it will have such kind of a fallout, but it definitely had this kind of a fallout where some sections of the society did not participate in that way to the movement which they might have if the situation would have been different. But we cannot just argue that. We have to see history from that perspective, that the kind of situation which was existing and the way events they unfolded. Professor S. Gopal has argued that Namier was accused of taking the mind out of politics. This school, he is referring to the Cambridge school, has gone further and has taken out not only the mind but decency, integrity and selfless commitment out of Indian national movement. So what we see is that the Cambridge school, the way it has written things, has taken out the decency, integrity and the selfless commitment of the Indian out of the Indian national movement, because the way they have written their history is written in such a way that they do not want to give any kind of credit to the national movement. So when you try to see the role of the role of the extremists in retrospect, we say that they made an immense contribution to the national movement, because the moderate politics was not bearing any fruit. So they realized that they had to find other ways to take the movement forward. Moreover, their fiery speeches and emotionalism which was there in them also brought a number of masses to the national mainstream, those who participated. So with this, I would like to end the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
very good afternoon to all the viewers. Today's topic of discussion is Swadeshi Movement. Swadeshi Movement, which began in 1905, was one of the important movements in the context that moderates and the extremists both wholeheartedly participated in the movement. This movement was one of the important kinds in the context that it was organized very well. People from different strata of the society, they joined the movement. The reasons for the Swadeshi movement, that why it was started, was the partition of Bengal. The way British partitioned the Bengal into East and West Bengal, so that they are able to weaken the nationalist tendencies which were being prevailing in these regions, was one of the important considerations for the British to partition Bengal. They argued that they were partitioning the Bengal for the administrative expediency or administrative convenience, because Bengal was a very large province, but they had their other designs in mind when they partitioned it. And when Bengal, the kind of decision which was being taken to partition Bengal was taken, then huge protests in Bengal could be seen, and how the people, they came in large numbers, they associated themselves with the idea of Swadeshi, that they had to use the indigenous products, the kind of products which are being made in India, and they also had to boycott the foreign products which came to India. So this kind of Swadeshi and boycott, it created some sort of a double impact, in which a number of Indian industries, they prospered, and on the other hand it gave some kind of a blow to the foreign industries, in a way that the people, those who were exporting from Britain to India, their exports, they were being rejected by the Indians. So what we see when we say that what is Swadeshi, Swadeshi means to use the indigenous manufactured commodities, and at the same time there was also an emphasis on indigenous education. Both moderates and the extremists, they emphasized the use of both the indigenous goods, and the Swadeshi and the boycott movement in 1905 against the partition of Bengal was an important moment in the Indian national movement. So what we see is that there was not only emphasis on using the indigenous goods or commodities, but at the same time there was a focus on the national education as well, because India, the British, they wanted to create a class in which English should be taught to them, and that was the motive of the Macaulay as well. In 1835, in the Macaulay's Minute of Education, it was being decided that English will be taught to the Indians. They wanted to create a class in India which was Indian in blood and color, but their taste, their opinion, their morality and their intellect should be British in nature. So when this class which is taught in English language, they will be able to identify with the British culture, they will be able to identify with the British products, and then they will use those British products as well. So that was the motive of the British, and that is how they wanted to create this kind of a class. And here also, when Swadeshi movement was started, the Indians realized that unless they will provide education to the Indians in their own languages, then they will not be able to come out of the slavish mentality which had been created because of the introduction of the English language. So when British, they divided Bengal into two parts, they said that they were partitioning Bengal for administrative reasons. Bengal was considered to be a huge province which had Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. So it was not easy to administer such a large province, and that is why they were dividing it. But the way the partition of Bengal took place, the way it was being partitioned, it was very clear that they had ulterior motives. Their motives were not what they were claiming to be, rather their motives were different in nature. As Risley, who was the Home Secretary to the Government of India, he argued that United Bengal was powerful and division will weaken it. So when they will be able to divide the Bengal, then only they will be able to divide they will be able to weaken the base of Indian nationalism. Bengal as a province, we find that a number of leaders, they came from Bengal, and Bengal had a very solid kind of a support to the national movement. So they realized that if they will divide Bengal, then the national movement will also be weakened in that sense. And they argued that if they will divide Bengal in such a way that you have majority of Muslims in eastern Bengal and majority of Hindus in the western Bengal, then they will also be able to create the communal tension in these regions, because both Muslims and Hindus, they had fought shoulder to shoulder in the revolt of 1857, and they became a threat to the British in that sense. So the British realized that if they will be able to divide Indians on the basis of the religion, then they will be able to achieve their objective as well, and they will be able to in a way promote the communal tensions in India. And if you see that how Bengal was divided, in which that in the eastern Bengal majority of the Muslim population was there, and in the western Bengal a majority of Hindu population was there. As you can see the kind of data which is there, that how the kind of population which was there, it is given in terms of data, and how it was being divided as well, that the aim of the division was on the basis of religion. And Lord Curzon, who was the Governor General and Viceroy during that particular period, he argued that Dhaka could be the capital of the new Muslim majority province, and data is also given that how large number of Muslims will be there in Dhaka and lesser number of Muslims will be there in the western part of Bengal. So this was the kind of objective in which the things they were being designed, and it was also being realized by the Indians. And when they initiated the Swadeshi movement, they clamored for unity. The ideas of Raksha Bandhan, in which Hindus and Muslims, they will tie rakhis on each other's hands to show their solidarity, was also being mooted, or it was also being practiced during that particular period. The concept of Atma Shakti, or self confidence, self reliance, was also talked about, which could be achieved through using the Swadeshi products. So all these kind of ideas, they were being discussed during the Swadeshi movement. When we see the initiation of the Swadeshi movement, when this kind of decision was taken on 19th of July 1905 that Bengal will be partitioned, a number of meetings they were being organized against this kind of a decision which was taken by the government. And this official declaration of the movement then took place on 7th August 1905. And on this very same date, in the very same meeting which was organized in the town hall, famous boycott resolution was also passed. September 1st, 1905, government declared partition will come into effect on 16th October 1905. 16th October 1905 was announced as a day of mourning throughout Bengal, and it was also observed as Arandhan, that the cooking will not take place, they will not make food. It was some sort of a symbol of mourning. Then observance of Raksha Bandhan, tying rakhis, sign of brotherhood and unity of the two Bengals, Eastern Bengal and the Western Bengal. So what we see in the Swadeshi movement, Swadeshi became some sort of a watchword. People, they focused that indigenous industries, they should be promoted, more and more Swadeshi goods, they should be used. They should boycott the foreign products in the form of cloth, foreign products in the form of foreign liquor, foreign products in the form of foreign sugar, or any other commodities. They should be rejected in every way, and they should be boycotted. Huge bonfires of all these foreign products, they could be seen during this particular period. And at the same time, what was also happening is that a number of Indian industries, they were also being established. Bengal Chemicals, for example, Calcutta Potteries, all these kind of industries, they were also being opened during that particular period. Then organization of the Swadeshi fairs, which were selling the indigenous goods, that was also being taken care of. Then production units of matchboxes, soaps, oil mills, they were also being opened, and charkha became a symbol of concern for the masses in the context of economic self-sufficiency. Huge bonfires or burning of foreign cloth was also being undertaken. So, what we see during this particular period, that charkha or khadi, it became a symbol of the concern of economic self-sufficiency during that particular period, and more people, they were being asked to follow the principle in which they should use charkha for themselves, so that they can produce their own cloth. So, the focus was on economic self-sufficiency, and later this was also used by Mahatma Gandhi very successfully in the national movement as well. In the context of boycott, what we see is that picketing of shops, various shops in which a huge number of women, they also participated, could also be seen. Then the focus was on not joining the British educational institutions, rather starting the own or the indigenous educational institutions. Carlisle circular was issued by the British, and it threatened the students, picketers, to desist from any activity, otherwise they will not be provided any kind of grant by the British. A number of schools and colleges, they were being boycotted. All the government schools which were being run by the British, they were being boycotted by the Indians. And Indians, they established a number of institutes, Bengal Technical Institute for example, or Bengal National College and School, they were being opened, and a number of primary and the secondary schools in numerous parts of India, they were being established by the national leaders during this particular movement. So, what we see is that there was some kind of an effervescence, some kind of hope within the masses, and some kind of a political activity which was taking place, which was giving some kind of thrust to the national movement, and the focus was on indigenous aspects, the focus was on things which were being produced in India, and they wanted that the foreign products or the foreign education which was being provided to them in the English education, that should be rejected by the Indians. Sumit Sarkar, a renowned historian, has done some sort of a distinction, fourfold distinction, the kind of trends which we find in the Swadeshi movement. So, how these kind of trends, the different trends during different times could be seen in the Swadeshi movement. For example, the moderate traditions could be seen initially, then constructive Swadeshi, which was on the lines suggested by Tagore, then the passive resistance model, and then the revolutionaries. Sumit Sarkar has assigned a sovereign role to ideology in explaining the dynamics of the conflict within the Swadeshi movement and as a binding force. So, what we see is that all these kind of trends could be seen in the Swadeshi movement, and at the same time the role of ideology was very important, as has been argued by Sumit Sarkar. Then a number of corps of volunteers or Samitis, they were also established during this particular period, and these kind of Samitis or corps of volunteers, they were being engaged in a number of activities, a lot of constructive work in various spheres, they were being undertaken by these volunteer corps or Samitis, and at the same time a number of Samitis, they also engaged themselves in a number of violent activities as well. So, they were doing both constructive work in maybe for example famine or flood relief. At the same time they were also engaged in disseminating the ideals of the Swadeshi movement, that why that movement was launched, why it was very important that movement should succeed, and why and how the British were some sort of a threat to the Indians in every way. So, all these kind of things, they were being undertaken by the volunteer corps, and some of the Samitis, for example Swadesh Bandhav Samiti, Anti-Circular Society, Anushilan, etc., they were there, and how they were propagating the ideas of Swadeshi in boycott. They were also organizing the crafts and the national schools, and they were also establishing the arbitration committees to solve the disputes. They were also promoting the folk musicians and artists to perform on the Swadeshi theme in regional dialects. So, what we see is that a number of artists, they were also associating themselves with this kind of movements in art and culture. Jatra, for example, was one of the important forms in Bengal of the folk theatre. So, they were also utilizing the folk theatre, that how a folk theatre in which the masses, they were able to identify with the performers, because the performers were also belonged to that community. It was also in their language. That language was very important because they were speaking in the vernacular language. So, the ideas of Swadeshi and Boycott reached masses in the local language, and the local masses could identify with the performers. So, it was some sort of a support to the national movement as well, that how the national movement, in which Swadeshi movement was one of the parts of the national movement initially, and how the people, those who were associated with these movements, how they got inspired because of the kind of work which was being done by those who were engaged in the volunteer corps. So, popular festivals and fairs, they were being utilized during this particular period. For example, earlier we discussed about the Ganapati festival or Shivaji festival, which was being initiated by Tilak. So, similar kind of festivals they were being used by the extremist leaders, so that more and more people, they should come to the movement. So, some sort of a mass mobilization should take place. So, all these kind of efforts, they were being made during this particular period. And how other not only Jatra but other kinds of folk theatres like Nautanki, Swang, then Yakshigan, they were being utilized at the local levels during that particular period. And when these kind of things, they were being used at the local level, then it provided an opportunity to the masses to interact with the people, those who were performing. And at the same time, the dissemination of information was also taking place. So, what we see during this particular period is that various kinds of arts or cultural movements, they were also being used so that information reaches the masses. For example, Nandalal Bose was associated with arts, and he also made a point where he got some sort of a scholarship as well, because the focus was not on the European art, the focus was on the Indian art, and how Indian art was relegated by the European art, citing that European art was comparatively more superior, which was not the case during that point of time, and how the Indian elements of the art, they were made popular by the people, those who were associated with the Indian art. So, moderates, for example, they did not take the Swadeshi movement very far, because the extremist group had become more and more dominant during that particular period, and the kind of idea of self-help which was being promoted by Rabindranath Tagore talked about the idea of Atma Shakti, in which he was talking about the self-reliance, and this kind of self-reliance meant not only in the framework of the goods, rather it was there in the context of education, it was there in the context of political ideas, it was also in the context of self-rule or self-government. So, what we see during this particular period, that extremists, they wanted that the boycott should also extend from British products and educational institution to other fields like colonial administration, law courts and services. Bipin Chandra Pal called this approach as passive resistance. Aurobindo Ghosh argued for organized and relentless boycott of British products, their educational institutions, law courts and executive, and social boycott of supporters of Raj and civil disobedience of unfair laws. So, what we see is that the people, those who are associated with the Swadeshi movement, they were also arguing that the boycott should extend to other regions as well. They should not only restrict themselves to education and products, rather they should go to British administration, British laws, then social boycott of the supporters of the Raj, the people those who were supporting the British Raj, and any kind of unfair laws, they should be rejected by the Indians. So, they wanted to extend the definition of the boycott, which was restricted to only two things, to other spheres and fields. So, this was an important achievement in the sense that they were able to realize that the British administration, British laws, they were there to oppress Indians in every way. In the context of art and culture, a number of songs they were being composed during that point of time, and how these songs they became popular during the Swadeshi movement, as you can see on the screen as well. Amar Sonar Bangla was written by Rabindranath Tagore during that particular period, and it became the national anthem of Bangladesh in 1971. Then Abanindranath Tagore challenged the authority of Victorian naturalism over Indian art and drew encouragement from prosperous native traditions of Ajanta, Rajput and Mughal paintings. And thereafter Nandalal Bose, who also left a key impression on the Indian art, and he got a scholarship from the Indian Society of Oriental Art in 1907. So, what we see is that all these people, not only those who are in the political sphere, but the people those who are engaged in the cultural aspects, they were also they were also playing a very important role from that perspective, that culture and art was also coming out of the clutches of the colonial rule, that these areas which created some kind of an impact on the masses, these areas were also taken over by the people those who were nationalist in their approach. Then we also see another trend, as has been argued by Sumit Sarkar, which was a trend of the revolutionaries. Hemchandra Kanungo opened a bomb factory in Calcutta, and Prafulla Chaki and Khudiram Bose made an abortive attempt on the life of Kingsford, who was a British official. Then Dhaka Anushilan carried out the Bara dacoity in 1908. There were certain constraints, lack of organization, elite social background, communal rhetoric, and confusion regarding need for mass mobilization. So, what we see is that revolutionaries also played an important role in the context, that they gave us our pride back. They had this kind of personal heroism, they were individualistic in that sense that they were operating in very small groups, and it was very imperative as well, because they were operating in the form of secret societies. Britishers were there to repress them in every way, and some of the historians, those who are basically Cambridge historians or those who are writing from the imperialist mindset, they have negated the role of revolutionaries by calling them terrorists, which is totally a misnomer in every way, because revolutionaries were working for the Indians. So, they were considered to be terrorists by the British, and the imperialist and the Cambridge school, they reject their contribution and tell them that they were the terrorists. So, they were some sort of a terror for the British, but they were working for the Indians, and these revolutionaries definitely made an important contribution to the Indian national movement, and how their contribution was negated by the Cambridge and the imperialist school by calling them as terrorists has been one of the important aspects of the Indian national movement, that how historiography has tried to negate their contribution by calling them by misleading names. Then we come to their assessment, that how their multifaceted program which was there, how their techniques which were there in the movement, they were able to achieve or create some kind of impression on the various sections of the society, and how they became actively associated with the movement. Then when we see the social base of the movement, then the zamindari group, lower middle class in the small towns and the cities, they joined the movement. Then school and college students and women who actively participated in the picketing and the demonstrations. So, we see that their support base increased a bit. Some people, those who were initially not there with the moderates, they also joined this particular movement. Now, they also came in their support, as we can see that many college and school students and then women, they also came to the movement in terms of forefront when they made some kind of a call. Sumit Sarkar has argued in the context of the failure of the movement that they failed to evolve any kind of radical agrarian program. They were not able to take the peasants, the peasant concerns were not brought into their ambit, and if they would have brought within their ambit, that then they would have been able to secure their support as well. Then they were not able to secure the support of the Muslims, because the utilization of the traditional popular customs and festivals, it was being misinterpreted, and the colonial government also played a role by supporting the communalist aspects of these movement. So that was one of the handicaps of the movement, and how the government tried to use communalism to incite Muslims against the movement. So what we see is that two important handicaps of the movement could be seen from the agrarian perspective and from the communal point of view. Though the movement did not intend to show these kind of aspects, and they might not have been deliberate in nature, but they were being best utilized by the colonial government, who highlighted these kind of aspects as well, that it was largely some sort of a Hindu movement and wanted to alienate the Muslims. So when we try to see that why the movement declined, then the kind of restrictions by the British, the kind of repression which was followed by the British against the movement were the important factors for the decline of the movement. Then the internal quarrels and the Surat split of the Congress in 1907 were another important factors for the decline of the movement. Then how the major leaders of the movement, they were being deported and imprisoned, was another important factor. But we have also to realize the fact that mass movements cannot go on and on. Mass movements, they have to have a very smaller shelf life, because people cannot be expected to make sacrifices continuously for a very longer duration of time. So mass movements, they have to be for a very short duration of time, so that they are able to create some kind of an impact. So in that context, we have to see that mass movement have to be short in nature. They cannot be very long, and if they are very long, then they are bound to fail. So from that perspective, I would like to end the discussion. I would like to point out that Swadeshi movement was an important phase in the Indian national movement, and how the idea of Swadeshi and boycott, it united the Indians, and at the same time it gave a thrust to the Indian industries as well, and it was also a source of inspiration to the later nationalists. So thank you so much.
Okay, on that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and I hope, dear friends, that you have been enlightened and that you have come to understand what what position did extremists hold in the Indian national movement, and what the Swadeshi movement was all about. On that note, thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.